his DMEs did not want to give us access to our patients' data, who had already consented.
Yeah.
See, I think of about, there's a decentralized approach, which you mentioned, which is each person should be able to get their records in hopefully a format that can be passed on to somebody else. Then you can say, okay, well, I got my CPAP records, I got my 23andMe record, and I got these 3 other things, and someone's asking me to be a participant in a research project. I'm like, bing, 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 here's my format, and you can now have permission to study it and have clinicians look at it and come up with better ideas. So I think it's a kind of two-pronged approach. One is like, you bring all these big data sets together, it's like, oh, that sounds hard, right? Or you say, everyone, take responsibility who wants to make a difference and get the portable data so that then they can pass them along to the right groups that they want to pass them along to.
Yeah, I'm very healthy right now, knock on wood, and I know that as a healthcare ecosystem, we're trying to move towards interoperability, but I really do believe that interoperability will happen well after I'm dead. There are too many egos, there are too many empires, and there's frankly a hell of a lot of money wrapped up in our healthcare system. Mm-hmm. I haven't gotten fired yet either.
No,
right?
this is great.
And so we can all drive towards interoperability because I think it's probably the right thing to do and there's momentum there, but we can have portability now. And then again, I don't know how each of you feel, but I know that in the disease community, typically, we feel like there's not a lot of control, and so we try to control what we can control. If we control our own data and we get to choose who we want to share it with, what organizations we feel are doing that deep learning that's going to come up with that next treatment, that better treatment, or the C word, a cure, it's incredibly empowering, and I think it's real. I don't think it's a pipe dream, no pun intended.
What's let me ask you a quick question on that. So, what is a format that is available today, or do we have to invent the format for the personal records?
So there are records kept in all different forms and formats, and so when we grab data from individuals, or individuals send data to kind of store in their citizen profile, we take it hopefully in electronic format, although if it's sent to us in paper format, we scan it in. So we actually have a machine learning component that's going through. It's a combination of OCR, but it's also, I don't know how many of you are familiar with codes, ICD codes and SNOMED codes and things like that. We're trying to play with the taxonomy that exists in order to kind of get to sameness. And so we're not going to drive interoperability, but what we are going to do is kind of bring all of that data in and give it a structure so that it can be computable by other groups.
It needs a structure, and it needs to be cleaned from what we've seen from a lot of the raw data through the sleep health study, what we're seeing with the passive data from the consumer apps, wearables.
And honestly, that it's not just a wearables or a device problem. When you have a health record, different doctors call different things. You can have a heart attack or you can have a myocardial infarction. It's the same thing, but obviously we have to teach systems to recognize those things as the same.
And I think the other key point to the AI conversation that's so prevalent, since we were the first research kit connected to the IBM Watson Health, is that it's one thing to have AI and what we all think it is. You still need the human input to design the question, to design the product, to design the device. More importantly, to ask the question.
Yeah.
So healthcare is the only industry in the world that doesn't bring the end user in to the beginning of the conversation, to the design. And that is sort of one of the, I think, the key things, especially with sleep, where sleep deprivation in med school, that was your badge of honor. How much could you do on as little sleep? So breaking that mentality in itself is a humongous effort that we're pushing up. That 800-pound boulder, we're pushing it uphill right now, because it's the younger doctors that hopefully are starting to appreciate, hey, if I get my sleep, I'm going to make less errors, and I'm going to take better care of my patients, and they're going to have better outcomes.
The irony in all that is I think healthcare recognizes that sleep is critically important, right? We hear 8 hours of sleep. We hear all of the developmental stages and how, how much sleep you need. We call ourselves, or we say that we exist within a healthcare system, but we are in an illness-based system. We are not a wellness preservation system. And so again, just being here for a few hours, I'm realizing how core this group is to so many other communities that are affected by disease, because ultimately, that's what we tell every disease community. You need to take your medicine, you need to eat right, you need to get exercise, and you need to sleep. And if you start to take some of those pillars out, we're in the same mess that we're in right now.
Yeah, I'll absolutely agree after hearing from both of you. This group has all the elements of the problem exist here. And I'll go back to it. I would suggest that the CPAP data is a magnification of that, because that is such incredibly useful data to study along with all the other subjective input somebody might give you in the survey and so forth, that it's unbelievable that the researchers don't have access to all of that data, and so there's a really strong example of the problem. And then, of course, you can wrap, you're younger than I am, and you're saying that this problem's not going to get solved in my lifetime. That's a little depressing for us older people, but, again, you bring politics
Just the
back into the world.
interoperability piece. Portability is going to
interoperability,
take us
right.
home.
And the interoperability piece is huge, is being able to collect it all simultaneously and use it together, and that's true. So, how do we fix it? It's a great question, and nobody's going to have an answer in this room, but how the heck do we fix this?
That's a great segue. So does anybody have an answer in this room, or a question, if you don't have an answer?
There's
Anyone?
an answer.
We've lost our microphone runner. There you go.
Actually, I have a question. It's a comment or a question. You tell me. What about trying to create an open source standard for interchange of data between the different branches of medicine? I have no idea how, when you're talking about collecting that data, you're collecting different data depending on different diseases, I guess. Mm-hmm. Is there a way to create some kind of open source template that would allow everybody to use it?
So that's called a common data model, and honestly, it's a little screwed up that we have to go back and do this retroactively, because we don't have one health system, we don't have one health record. There's a bunch of different individual vendors that had their own models, and now they're essentially, we're trying to get all the records talking to each other, and that's what we call interoperability. But it has been painfully slow. Some of the large-scale initiatives in this country, like the Precision Medicine Initiative, now All of Us Research Program, which is 1 million different Americans participating in research, that was the foundation, and it's really not a reality yet. So we have a lot of work to do.
DOD actually does it pretty well.
The
Boy, did they
Veterans
spend a lot of money on it.
DOD.
Department of Defense.
Yes.
As interoperability is.
Who else has an idea, a solution? How might we?
Okay.
Yeah, I just want to mention Apple back in iOS 11 developed the Fast Health Interoperability Record, which is phenomenal. And if you all have an iPhone, go to Health, and you can add in hundreds of institutions have agreed to these standards. I just wonder why that hasn't been mentioned yet, because I think it's groundbreaking. And I've got all my Stanford records right here, and there are literally hundreds and hundreds of UCSF is in there. You basically just go in, sign in, and all your records are now in your iPhone in a very easy to use, approachable way for individuals to use. If you haven't gone in to the Health app on your iPhone, do it today, and go to the account, and then add your records from any of the institutions that are on there. And again, Stanford is in there, for example.
So I just want to address that. I think that's a brilliant idea, and I think that there's a lot of advocacy groups that are working on that. Full disclosure, Anil Sethi, who is the founder of Citizen, was actually the founder of a company called Glimpse. Glimpse was purchased by Apple, and that's the technology that you're actually using. one of the things to know about that, and probably I know it's a big deal in the oncology community, and I'm sure it's a bigger deal with the sleep disorders community, is 850 organizations feels like a lot, but it's not. There are so many individuals in this country that don't have the benefit of being treated at an academic medical facility, a large facility that has bought into that. So we still absolutely need to solve the problem of how do those people participate and how do those people get access to the additional knowledge. The other thing to note is what you're pulling in, incredibly valuable, that is the clinical data, but it's also portal data. So if you're interested, your entire health record is actually available to you as well, but it's usually a different request process. So I think it's kind of a both and. If it's available to you, do it, but also know that there's a lot more data out there on you.
Right. But if we could get all the institutions to agree to this standard, wouldn't that be wonderful?
It would be. There are still some people that are working in paper, no joke.
Working in
be.
paper and working in fax machines. But I would say there's one extra thing to what Dr. Borelli just mentioned, and is that not everyone has an Apple or an iOS.
Yep.
And that's one of the things that we want to see going forward with our sleep health app, is not just the iOS version, but 75% of the world is on the Android platform. And
Yeah.
That's absolutely important.
One of the other, sort of a question on this, is I'm sort of intrigued by the passive nature in it. I do consumer marketing, and there's always the flaw because you're getting data of the person who's motivated and loves to fill out surveys. So I think it's critical that we do it in such a way that it's not sort of Big Brother, but how do we get it so that you're getting everybody's data, you're not getting those who are motivated to answer your questions?
Yeah. So I'll speak to evidation. In our community of 3.5 million, we individually can send people and ask, but I think you also have to acknowledge it's a connected population, right? And so as technology comes more into play, we really have a lot of work to do on health disparities and making sure, like a lot of these AI algorithms that I want to be just honest about. I feel like some of the data sets in the cancer world, they were primarily Caucasian. And you see them in the major cities of the US as like who contributed data because it came from the academic health centers. And then you look at like the rural US, and so you'll see nobody kind of like in the Midwest, and then there's like Utah and Denver, and then there's an outline of the outside. And so while it's a new day, we still have a lot of work to do to make sure that precision health is reality for everybody in this country.
I will say too, again, pulling from the cancer space, which I hate bringing up all the time, but we have the same problem with all of our clinical trials. They're very white, they're very upper middle class. We've actually figured out finally that we need to go where the people are, into the communities. California, we have the Central Valley is a very different population than San Francisco or LA, and for me to walk into the Central Valley and be like, hey, you get your health records. There's a lot of things, not the least of which is immigration, that people are talking about and probably even more concerned about than their health. So it's going to those community leaders and saying, hey, we have this, we'd love to support your community, tell us how we can help. It's going into Oakland. There's the Catholic diocese there, and they are starting to do faith-based health education. So going into the churches, going into these community centers, I think it's a great opportunity for any advocacy group to go in and say, we know this affects your population. It might not be your top concern, but how can we help meet the needs and make it a symbiotic relationship?
And the caveat to that is who the messenger is. It can't be the doctor in the white lab coat, especially in the African-American community because of past history in this country, and same with the Latino community and so forth and so on. So it's who's giving the message. That's why we're doing an event like today, not just for the people in this room, but for our patients that we know can never be here, that they can learn about this, because once they do get empowered and they start to take care of themselves, then they can help. They can go back to their community, the barbershop, the church, wherever, and share their experience. So for every one person that we all here help save today, hopefully that person's going to go and save 10 more. We just need to speed it up.
I'm going to just offer a couple things. Back on the bias, in addition to, Caucasian people filling out the surveys and that kind of thing, you also have Caucasians writing the AI programs, right, with their bias. It's called the bias tribe. And it's something to keep in mind. I was going to also bring the conversation back to, what can we do? Because I've been doing this for a while now, and I'm sort of thinking that, there's a model when I first started working at Apple, which was they made sure that this was a product marketing thing, but it kind of worked. They made sure that the elementary schools and the middle schools and that kind of stuff had Apple products early and often, because they knew that eventually they'd grow up, become consumers. And in this conversation, there's a lot about trying to treat people like myself and maybe younger people than me, and that's really important. But when you have limited resources, you have to kind of ask the question, what can you make the biggest impact with? And my personal feeling is the biggest impact you can make is to prevent these things from happening at birth and focus on that type of thing, because in another 15 years or 20 years, that child will be an adult. And it's not that long. And we've spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to help people in the general community. And I think it's kind of time for a lot of people to try to focus on what about my child, what about my grandchild, or what about my sister's grandchild, that kind of thing. Because frankly, the thing that frustrates me is I knew about sleep apnea, and I had a 2-year-old that had a problem. So I went to the doctor, they took his adenoids out, and then I thought, oof, that's over. I didn't think about really what his problem was going to be later as an adult. Adam, on the other hand, got on top of it, got thinking about it, and he's been actively working with his child. And I think that's a really interesting place to go, where you start working with the pediatric community and trying to cut it out early or mitigate it, so that people don't have to wait 20 years and have cognitive dysfunction and suicidal thoughts and that kind of thing. So I just thought I'd offer that out as another alternative.
Thank you, and I'm going to take that as your wrap-up thought.
Yeah.
And then Stacy, if you're going to leave us with one thing that we could all be doing or that you think is important for the community to do, what's your closing thought?
I mean, you are all here in this room, so I have a feeling you kind of walk around and feel like you're kind of empowered and your voice is valid and can be heard. I would just encourage you to take that back out to your communities to help empower others. The system is broken, but it is the system we have. And a brilliant man just said to me the other day, Stacy, a Danish baker says you have to bake bread with the flour at hand. So that's what I'm going to leave you with.
I'll leave you with just the fact that when I learned is that, how prevalent sleep apnea is in our society. And I think we all in this room think that. We all think that it's a much bigger problem than people recognize, that it's an unsolved problem. And the only way that we're going to sort of prove it to everybody and solve the problem is to get out there and talk about it and collect data and to show it. So that's what I'll leave you with.
And I'll leave you with continue answering those surveys, participate in research when you have a chance, and I guess work on, as a community, how you're all going to aggregate your data and then use it to improve research and care. So thanks, everybody.
Thank you all.
Thank you, panel. Thank you all so much. We're just running about 10 minutes behind, but we're still going to keep with the schedule. So we're going to take a little break now. This will be the last opportunity for everyone to participate in the round robin with the experts in the back of the room. So we'll see everybody in about 30 minutes. We have about 5 to 7 minutes, everybody. 5 to 7 minutes. So make sure you get the stickers on your card, and then you can see Tina Piazza over here by the double doors. She has a Birkenstock collection box. You can submit your completed card there. 5 to 7 minutes. If everyone will start to wrap up, it'll just be another minutes for you to get back to your seat, and then we'll continue on with the final two items on the agenda, please. So if you have your round robin card, you can go ahead and give that to Tina over there by the door. She'll wave her hand. We'll do the drawing at the right at the end of the meeting. Yeah, do you want to go up there? Want to go here? What would you like? Whatever you want to do. Yeah, go wherever you're comfortable. Wherever you're comfortable. Can you introduce yourself, or would you like me to? Okay, go right ahead. Okay. Thank you, everyone, for taking your seats. We just have 2 more agenda items for the day. Thank you for sticking with us online. Hope so far you've enjoyed the topics and the presentations that we've had today. We're getting ready to just do a recap of some of the highlights of the day. And I'm going to introduce Dr. Joseph Borelli, who is a radiologist, and he has been on the American Sleep Apnea Association board for about 6 years. And so he's going to join us and take us through some of the exciting topics and interesting factoids that we've learned today. So I hand it over to you, Doctor. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Is my microphone working? We're all good? All right. Great pleasure to be here at my first Awake meeting. Thank you for inviting me, Adam. Wonderful venue. Great audience. Very stimulating. In fact, I would say this healthcare conference has been the most informative, educational, and exciting event I've ever attended in my career. It was all organized. And ironically, it was organized by a bunch of sleepy people. Go figure. Sleepy but very motivated. I would not be here, I think literally would not be here or even alive, but for this gentleman right here pictured beside me that I'm honored to stand beside just his photograph. And before I attempt to do the impossible, summarize what we've covered today, and I was very attentive because I knew I had to do this, I have to just give you a little bit of background on me because it brings in Dr. Gaiman, brings in Dr. Casey Lee, Dr. Stacy Kuo. I was involved with all those folks, and that's how I met Adam ultimately. About 10 years ago, I was suffering a cognitive decline, about maybe 15 years ago. And it was very insidious. It's like if you got, let's say, 1% less smart every month, would you notice it? And it kept getting worse and worse and worse and worse. And that's sort of the nature of this disease, sleep-breathing disorders. Just use the term sleep-breathing disorders. And it just gets very insidiously worse. And you don't really recognize it until you reach some sort of breaking point or you pass some sort of threshold. And mine was I was getting lost in my neighborhood. I couldn't remember people's names that I would meet. I would speak to someone and 5 seconds later forget their name. My attention was dropping. It got so bad I became suicidal. I didn't attempt suicide, but I thought about it a lot. And I knew there was a problem. I was waking up not well rested, non-restorative sleep is the term we use. And I'd wake up and I'd feel worse than when I went to bed, which then causes insomnia because the bed becomes your enemy. And so insomnia is sort of the main thing that people complain with early on, I believe. And we need to be attacking that early as well. Once clinicians hear that a patient has difficulty sleeping, falling asleep or staying asleep, or getting to bed late, that should trigger an investigation for a sleep-breathing disorder or other sleep disorders. But I got to the point where I was suicidal. I had 2 sleep studies done within about 2 years locally, one at a major university medical center. I'm in South Carolina. I'm not going to mention any names. And in both cases, they said I was essentially normal. The first case, they said it was completely normal. The second case, they said minimal, maybe your AHI is around 4. We'll try you on a pressure of 5 on CPAP. And that made me worse, even though I tried it diligently for several months. I figured, I guess I don't have a sleep disorder. And I continued to deteriorate. I developed I chaired the committee that developed the national MRI standards for the American College of Radiology, the MRI accreditation standards. And at the conclusion, once we finished that project, I had a 3-year appointment as chairman. After we completed that project in year 2, I resigned because I knew I just could not cope with my cognitive issues. I was struggling just with daily living activities. It was horrible. It was really horrible. I broke down in the shower crying. And the next day, I said, I'm going to find the best sleep medicine facility in the world. And that led me to this clinic and this gentleman right here. And when I saw him in the clinic, he walked in. Remember, opened the door, he walked in. Behind him were a bunch of fellows and residents and what have you. He said, Dr. Borelli, open your mouth. And he shined a flashlight into my mouth. And he took 2 steps back and he shook his head and he said, Dr. Borelli, you've had sleep apnea your entire life. And I recall when I was age 10, I had a blood pressure of 150/100, and I was hospitalized to find the source of that. The pediatric cardiologist told my parents I would not live past the age of 21. They told me that, thinking that I could handle it, and I did. I was like, I was invincible at age 10. And so, ironically, about that same time, 1972, CG wrote his first paper, which was the linkage of childhood hypertension to sleep apnea, which is somewhat ironic. But it took me about a year to get comfortable using CPAP. I was usually placed on a straight pressure, a continuous pressure, CPAP, right? And it felt like I was breathing into a balloon when I'd exhale, and it was intolerable for me. And I eventually switched to BiPAP, and I switched to different interfaces. I started using Afrin in my nose to clear up my nasal passages. I know some allergists and ENT doctors said don't do that. I've been doing Afrin in both nostrils once a night for 10 years. It hasn't given me any problems at all. I get a little stuffy in the evening beforehand, but that was really a breakthrough for me. And I'm on BiPAP, and I look at the data on the machine, what have you, with the Sleepyhead app that was mentioned by Dr. Stein, I believe. But since it took me a year, that motivated me to help people become compliant with CPAP. So I went to Philips Respironics. I had a friend who knew the senior people there, and I met with the CEO of the company, and I convinced them to develop an app to help to coach people to become compliant on CPAP. It was the first app they ever developed. I think they budgeted $7 million for it, and they ended up spending $14 million. It's now called Dream Mapper, not Sleep Mapper, Dream Mapper. And it met a lot of the goals I talked about, but not all of them. But it's still, I think it's benefited a lot of people. And then ultimately, I met Adam, and we worked together on PCORI, and then Apple's research kit came out and said, hey, Apple's done all the heavy lifting on collecting patient data and consenting. Let's do this on our own. And we then built this app with Carl Stepnowski, and it became the Sleep Health app. And all that was all volunteer work, and I'm very, very proud of that. And I'm very happy to be here before you and have the opportunity to speak to you. And I think this is a great meeting. I think we're going to have a bigger one next year. I'm definitely going to plan to attend that. Extremely valuable. There's so much to learn. It's such a complex issue. It affects so many more people that we've diagnosed, terribly underdiagnosed. So many stereotypes that are wrong, overweight, middle-aged males. This affects young people, and we need to be intervening much earlier. But enough about my story. Let's go on to the summary. And this is going to be very brief, and I picked up a few little notes and a few little things, some sort of hacks, maybe as you'd call them, as millennials might call them, that I've learned over the years that I'll share with you, rightly or wrongly. I'm a medical doctor, but this is not medical advice. This is just my suggestions to you. Also, I want to disclose, I was recently named medical director of Bleep, and I'm an investor in Snap CPAP LLC. They make an interface that attaches to your nose adhesively rather than through straps. And of course, I think it's great, but I'm not here to talk about that. We started out with Dr. Sullivan, and I think who was formerly at Stanford, and she had several panelists, and they were talking about these overlapping issues, asthma, chronic pain, anxiety, depression. There are all these comorbid conditions, and I think, as Adam said earlier, this is where patients frequently contact the healthcare system initially, is with a comorbid condition. One we didn't hear today was atrial fibrillation. I think virtually all atrial fibrillation is caused by sleep apnea, virtually all of it. And most cardiologists don't even check for it. So it's just an aside. There's no question that, there are so many, sleep affects everything. It affects every single cell. I think someone won the Nobel Prize recently for determining that there is a circadian clock in every living cell in your body. It has to do with enzyme production, enzyme that produces a protein that leaves the cell and it comes back in just a little over 24 hours, like 24 hours and 10 minutes, and the master clock in the hypothalamus has a 24-hour cycle to it. So it's like the master clock, but every cell in your body is expecting to rest. And that's why all these other comorbid conditions are related to sleep. Because if your GI tract doesn't sleep, you have irritable bowel syndrome. I'm oversimplifying, right? But if your brain doesn't sleep, toxins build up that cause Alzheimer's disease. And we know now that the brain cells shrink 40% in deep stages of sleep, which is extraordinary. And why do they shrink 40%? It allows room between them for them to remove the toxins. And we also found out about 5 years ago, independently in Europe and the United States, 2 research teams found a lymphatic pathway in the brain that allows the toxins to be removed. All your anatomy textbooks up until about 5 years ago showed lymphatics stopping here, none up here. And now we know they're there. Amazing, amazing. I personally believe, this is, you don't have to take this home, but I believe the #1 reason we do sleep is to allow the brain to remove toxins. That's the main reason it developed evolutionarily. Because think about it, when you're asleep, you're at risk for attack by a predator. And so we sleep because we absolutely have to, right? As we're putting ourselves at huge risk. So we sleep for a reason. I think that's the #1 reason why it developed evolutionarily. That's just my own personal theory. And I think that's why we see such a huge link between Alzheimer's disease and sleep disorders. So there's all these comorbid conditions, and they're not being addressed properly. We don't have the resources or awareness to do it right now. And that's why we're here, is to hopefully improve both of those, create greater awareness, both organically from patients, but also among institutions and among corporations that are involved. And I think with the model we have is what they have at Stanford, and the interdisciplinary group that they have at Stanford is a model that we should try to reproduce nationwide, internationally. We had the team sport meeting with Dr. Kuo, and by the way, Dr. Kuo's clinic, if you have a chance to go to see Dr. Kuo's clinic, it's the most amazing healthcare clinic I've ever seen in my life. And I told her that today. I said, oh my God, this is like incredible. It's like the healthcare clinic that Steve Jobs would have designed. Well, it turns out Steve Jobs and his family were patients of hers. But it is really, it's amazing. And she's an amazing lady, and wonderful to have her here today with us. And they talked about how they coordinated all their disciplines with allergy, with insomnia, with the myofascial exercises, the tongue exercises to help the tongue become better positioned in the mouth during sleep. It's very complex, and people presenting with initial sleep disorders or other comorbid disorders, when they get into the healthcare system, we need to evaluate all those areas to optimize their care, right? We heard a really compelling research from Dr. Gardner, I believe. Yeah, and I spoke with him afterwards. I think there's a lot of opportunity there because these devices that we're using late in the hours, he showed roughly something like a 10-fold increased risk of suicide between the hours of like midnight and 3 a.m., which is really extraordinary to see that. And that's something we can target. And a lot of times, especially younger people that are committing suicide, they're probably doing something on one of their phones, and I think we possibly could capture some data. Maybe they're typing in an anxious way, or something we can pick up by the interaction with these devices. And I've spoken to him about maybe working with Apple and doing something there with their new sort of generalized research kit app that they announced at the last the big announcement a couple weeks ago. But I think that's there's an opportunity potentially to intervene there. And then we heard about the challenge of patient-gathered healthcare data. We have healthcare data in disparate sources all over the world and stored differently. And we see, as I mentioned earlier, Apple has made an effort, probably other companies have made an effort to sort of standardize how we store this data and how we can access it. And that's going to be a key to where we get, as Will was mentioning, have machine learning look at these huge vast amounts of data and pour through it to find relationships between multiple factors that a human being could almost never find or may take years to find. I think that's going to be a key to maybe finding a cure to this condition. And I think technology is obviously going to be the answer, but without the awareness, we're not going to get the technology or the resources to go after it. And I just have just a few little, things I wanted to mention, and given the opportunity, the things that I've learned over time that kind of surprised me. I developed arrhythmias on high levels of CPAP, which I suffered about 30,000 premature atrial contractions, similar to atrial fibrillation, but not atrial fibrillation. And my pressure was very high, 20/15. And I went to Mayo Clinic, I went to Stanford, I went to 3 cardiologists. None of them could figure out what was wrong. They want to put me on drugs, what have you. One night I lowered my pressure by 5, and the next morning I woke up in normal sinus rhythm. So no question, the increased pressure, which was preventing filling of my cardiac atria. If your chest pressure is high, the blood flowing into your chest is going to be lowered, so it was actually changing the shape of my atria, which was triggering the arrhythmias. That's my theory. But no one's been able to explain it, but no question was related to the pressure. So if anyone's on high pressure and they get arrhythmias, you may look at maybe lowering your pressure or speaking to your physician about that. And no one, even Dr. Gaiman, didn't understand that, which is kind of interesting. I've also found that bi-level is a huge improvement over CPAP. And if anyone's struggling with CPAP and you're not on bi-level is a huge improvement because it allows you to exhale comfortably, right? I also found, again, I mentioned earlier, using Afrin to open my nasal passages every night, just once a day, no more than once a day. You will get a little rebound stuffiness the next day. Some people, it does affect more than that. For me, I can use it. And if you're having any problems with feeling that you're congested, you may want to give that a try. Maybe try it for a little while, but you will become addicted to it because you will get, if you stop it, you'll start getting stuffy. So it's kind of like a commitment. And again, I'm not recommending that. Just maybe suggest you try it. What else? I also found that I wake up frequently after about 4 or 5 hours. And I found a miracle drug. I just read about it recently, and it's been used for a while. It's called doxepin. You can get it in a liquid form, in generic. It's very inexpensive, and you take about 5 milligrams, or either 1 or 5 milligrams, equally effective to help you stay asleep. And that, to me, that's something I discovered within the last 6 months. It's been very helpful for me if you wake up after a short period of time. That's a form of insomnia. It's a type of insomnia where you wake up too soon. I have both sleep onset and sleep maintenance insomnia, or did. And that really helped me. And if you're having trouble with sleep maintenance, meaning staying asleep, talk to your doctor about trying some doxepin. It's used in a dose like 1/20th you would use for depression. What else? I think if there's anything I'd like to communicate to all physicians around the world, if anyone's listening here, people that have insomnia most likely have an underlying sleep breathing disorder. Barry Krakow had a study over 12 years of data, thousands of patients. 90% of patients presenting with insomnia have a sleep breathing disorder. And the last thing that doctors do is send them for a sleep study. They send them for cognitive behavioral therapy, which, yes, has a role, but it's not the cure. You need to open up the airway before any of the other cures are going to work. And that is so important. Insomnia indicates a breathing disorder, most likely, 90% of the time. Please get a sleep study. If you have any issues, or any of your friends, relatives, neighbors that has any difficulties with sleep, falling asleep, staying asleep, the first thing they should do is get a sleep study. And there's a good alternative. Sleep studies are expensive. This is one of the challenges. Sleep studies cost several $1,000s. But there's a company called Itamar. They make a device called WatchPat. I have no involvement whatsoever with the company. I own one of these devices because I use it for friends and family, which I test for free and treat for free, because I'm not a sleep medicine doctor. I'm an MRI doctor. And WatchPat, you just wear it on your wrist, and there's a little probe that goes on your finger. It looks at peripheral arterial tone. So every time you struggle to breathe, your body goes, oh my God, I'm being waterboarded. And like literally, you're struggling to breathe, and it's like a drowning type of mechanism, and your body constricts the peripheral arteries because it thinks you're under attack. So if you're being attacked by an animal, you might lose a limb. Well, it's a good idea not to have your blood in that limb. So that's your natural mechanism, is to shunt the blood towards your torso and brain where you need it. And so that device is extremely sensitive, extremely accurate. And I may alienate a few people here, but I would say it's probably better than most sleep labs at detecting sleep disorder breathing. As I've seen, because there's a huge variation in quality. And also, we also heard about differences in interpretation. You could take 2 sleep studies and have them interpreting, and get 2 different results, 2 different AHIs. There's no such thing as your AHI. It varies by day, it varies by clinic, it varies by criteria. What else? Anything else? Adam, anything else that you know that I like to talk about that I may have missed? UARS, okay. So UARS, upper airway resistance syndrome, okay? So it's a sleep breathing disorder, but instead of sleep apnea where you breathe, 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 stop, and then you get aroused, and then you breathe, breathe, breathe. That's like conventional sleep apnea, right? And nothing's black and white. Everything's all mixed together. Upper airway resistance syndrome is like breathing through a tiny straw, like a stirring straw. With every breath, you're struggling, and your body recognizes that struggle. The tension in the muscles is recognized by your brain. It knows you're struggling to breathe. It's not a good state to be in, and you're in that all night. It's like being waterboarded throughout the night. And I personally believe that has more effects systematically than sleep apnea, and that's why it presents earlier, presents in younger people, because it affects your whole system, because you're triggering the fight or flight throughout the night, and you're releasing cortisol, which causes you to store fat and become obese. So I think people that are obese and have sleep apnea became obese because of a sleep breathing disorder, and often upper airway resistance syndrome. And upper airway resistance syndrome was discovered by this man right here and described by him, but it's not as well recognized or accepted in the healthcare community. This guy was right. Trust me, this guy was right. And the reason it's not diagnosed is because it's much harder to diagnose it, because you have to spend a lot more time looking at the electroencephalogram. I was trained on polysomnographic interpretation at Stanford, and I know the differences. And the difference between someone that knows how to look at the electroencephalogram, which is a bunch of squiggly lines, and looking for arousals, which is what you need to do to diagnose upper airway resistance syndrome, is much more time consuming, and they don't get paid any more to do it. Okay? So, and hopefully, and I know at Stanford and other centers they're trying to use AI and machine learning to read these electroencephalograms to make it more efficient and not require so many resources. But I think the vast majority of people that are misdiagnosed of not having a sleep disorder, after they've gone to a sleep lab, they probably have upper airway resistance syndrome, as I did, misdiagnosed twice. I go to Stanford, they did the polysomnogram for me at Stanford, and my AHI at Stanford was 27. Prior to that, it was 4 at the other one institution, and the other one it was 0. So lots of variability. So there are many, many, many areas of improvement. We can improve diagnosis, we can improve public awareness, awareness of the payers, awareness of the government authorities. There is so many opportunities for improvement here, and we have so little resources right now, and we need to divert many more resources. And the main thing is, I think the main thing we can do, the lowest hanging fruit long term, is early intervention and screening of the entire population at an early age, maybe even near birth, as at this point, maybe with genetic testing or something, maybe a way to analyze the tongue or the frenulum. But we have to be doing population-based screening. Screening to be effective has to be low cost and sensitive. You don't want what's called a false negative. You want to tell someone, hey, you don't have this disorder. You want to catch everyone that has this disorder. Maybe a few people you say, yeah, you might have it, and if you do like an in-lab study, then it's not as bad as we thought. And I think we could do something like a watch path that we could do universally, maybe test everyone every 5 years or something like this. That might be a way, that may be a pathway to go. But ultimately, we're going to get to the point where we're going to take, we're going to, through this organization, I think we're going to have a huge impact in long term, not very long term. I think in the next 3 to 5 years, we may be able to cut the incidence of sleep disordered breathing untreated by half. And I think that'd be a really great goal. And I'm happy, thank you all. I'm happy to take any questions that I might be able to answer, or offer any questions to anyone in the facility. Thank you.
Or talk about today? Yep. Anything about today?
It's just a comment, but I've been stuck by this. All day we've been talking about the fact that people who have sleep apnea end up having cognitive problems, just like people who are alcoholics or drug addicts. The difference is that they don't know, because they're not doing anything, to get to that point. But, listen to the story of Adam, of Peter, of Brian. It's when they got into an accident, you know, that endangered their lives and lives of others, that suddenly they realize something was wrong. Somebody who is an alcoholic knows he's doing something that, you know. So I think that's something that's maybe obvious, but it's very interesting to me that you know, we're not aware of things that are as bad as, you know, that you know, you should be able to, we should get like a DUS, you know, driving under sleep deprivation, you know, something like that. I mean, it's, and I agree with you, nobody knows about it, or not enough people.
Right.
A general blanket test should probably be done.
I can tell you that I know GM has technology, their self-driving technology does detect sleepy drivers, and it's actually very effective. General Motors, yeah. And I think we're going to see more of that, but to address that specific thing, yes. That you're right on, absolutely.
That's interesting that you bring that up, Jean-Noel, because a few years ago, and it infuriated some people, but there was going to be a saliva test that policemen could give to drivers that they suspected had not, you know, had any sleep. And the saliva would be able to tell whoever was, you know, checking out the test that they, you know, whether they slept, how many hours they hadn't slept. And I don't know whatever happened to that science, but I just thought it was kind of, you know, 1984-ish sort of, but interesting that it could be done with saliva. It was something about interleukin, and I don't remember everything.
That could be, you know, I think most people that have sleep breathing disorders have insomnia and therefore get less sleep, total sleep time, and you could possibly document it with that. That's a good idea,
Well,
for especially for screening.
I mean, if you are sleepy because you have sleep apnea and you don't realize it, that's one thing. But if you, I mean, I was a sleep tech, and there were many times I tried to drive home in the morning impaired. And I was like, how would that be if a sleep tech, you know, hurt somebody with their car, you know? I used to take many naps in the hospital parking lot just so that I could get over that hump and get home safely. But, you know, sometimes it's not safe to sleep in a car like that either. So anyway, I just wanted to say that.
Someone over here?
There's another question over here. Okay. Hold on one moment. I have to
Don't be,
Tetris my way over here.
I didn't really understand or hear completely what you said about the watch device that could be used to monitor.
Yes.
Could you give a little bit more explanation of that, please?
yeah, that device is called WatchPat, one word, by a company called Itamar, I-T-A-M-A-R. Again, I have no affiliation whatsoever to disclose with them. I think it's a great device. It's FDA approved, designed and built in Israel, and I think it's a revolutionary device.
We actually have an Itamar representative here, Zohar.
There you go.
We'd be happy to show it to you and let you know.
I'm free for dinner tonight, by the way. Just kidding, just kidding.
Any other questions about the day's topic? Something you want to revisit?
I'm very opinionated. I'll give you an opinion on anything. This is your chance, your last chance.
Yes, you have one? 1 second.
Stereo.
I guess my concern is, like so many medical situations that evolve in our society, that the sleep study that I took was, you know, I am lucky to have good health insurance, but it was well over $3,000.
Yes.
And when you think about the population, the demographics, whatever, and how many people might have sleep apnea, I would hope in the future that that process and that amount of money, I mean, that the whole procedure, the expenditure would be reduced as the technology evolves.
Right.
I mean, you were talking about something that you're wearing on your wrist.
Right.
I mean, I'm hoping someday that we have something like that can be provided to people so that we can diagnose more people. I mean, I probably had sleep apnea all my life, and I was just diagnosed a year ago with severe sleep apnea.
Right.
So it has affected my life.
Right.
I thought I was just getting older, and I would just be exhausted like
Yep.
this for the rest of my life.
Tired, not sleepy, but tired, right?
Tired all
Tired,
the
exactly.
time,
Right,
and,
right.
and I'm on my feet, and I know a lot of people
Right.
probably experience that.
So when I was mentioning that device, I believe that device is as good or better than the majority of full sleep lab studies, overnight sleep studies. That device, which that costs about $250 to have a study. Maybe I'm about right, maybe it got moved around, but maybe about $250 versus $3,000, yes. And so, yeah, the technology is allowing the cost to come down. No question, we'll be able to screen people, the whole population, at relatively low cost. We screen for colon cancer with colonoscopies that cost several $100s, you know?
But let's be clear, we can train every pediatrician, every dentist in the country, every school nurse to look in the airway in about 30 seconds and know right away whether someone needs to actually go have a sleep study.
Yeah.
You're
Yeah.
looking at, you heard
Yeah.
Christine Semenek talk about scalp tongues, scarred cheeks, bruxism. They look at what they call your Mallampati score,
Yeah.
how much room is in the back of your airway, and just those 3 or 4 variables alone should send you in the right pathway and triage to where to get the best intervention.
Yeah.
So it's not just about studying, and the field has sort of done a lot about that. We need to make sure we're treating people and that we remove as many of these obstacles and barriers, because if the bed partner witnesses the apnea or the bedwetting for a child or the night terrors, the sleepwalking, whatever it may be, that's the best objective science measurement because it's witnessed, it's observed,
Yeah.
and the insurers don't care.
Adam, I'd like to add one thing, and you know, segueing from what you said. Orthodontia that makes the mouth smaller, to align your teeth by removing teeth and making it smaller, no one should ever have that done, ever again. The small mouth reduces the volume, and the tongue has only one place to go to block the airway. And I've seen so many people that have had multiple teeth removed to have their teeth straightened, and then they put that retainer on that pulls their teeth back and makes their maxilla smaller. That's the opposite of what you want. You want your mouth to grow during childhood and adolescence. And I've seen so many people that have had that procedure done. I met a woman that had 4 teeth removed, and around age 12, she started developing POTS, postural tachycardia syndrome, which is a comorbid condition, to the point where she became an invalid. And as soon as she went on CPAP, in 2 weeks, she was up and running. It was a night and day difference. And she went back to her orthodontist in Germany, and they denied that any association between doing orthodontia and sleep apnea, which is complete BS, I'm sorry.
Which is a great segue for me introducing this man's son, who's in the back of the room, who's been nice enough to come and be an honorary chair to help us launch what we call our RUN campaign. And RUN is an acronym for right under your nose. You've heard me talk about that today. It's also the last words that Dr. Gaiman gave me about 2 weeks before he passed. He said, you go run with this cure and make sure nobody gets in your way. And that's our job as an organization. That's where we're going. And I'd like to invite up Eric Gaiman to talk about his dad. This guy probably knows more about sleep medicine before the age of 10 than anybody in the world. And he'll tell you his story. So you want to come up here and talk? And go, yeah. And while Eric's coming up there, I'll just show you, this is a photo and a portrait we did of Dr. Gaiman, and this is an infographic that's set up for the public that we've designed that will be released on our website and via social media outlets. And this helps explain the career of Dr. Gaiman from 1968 to 2019. He was a true 49er. Take it away, Eric.
Thank you, Adam. I promise I'll be brief, don't worry. First, let me thank everyone here for allowing me to participate in something that my father, Dr. Gaiman, dedicated his life to. Unlike the many other speakers at this event, I don't have any formal expertise in the subject matter, unless you count the unplanned attendance at sleep conferences my father took me as a child. Rather, I want to simply talk about the man who was behind the great researcher and professor. My father was passionate about his work. He loved the research and exploration of sleep medicine, and he dedicated most of his time to it. His weekend schedule was generally some light garden work, followed by a bike ride through the Golden Gate Park, and writing and reading in his office. He had this incredible ability to focus on a subject and spend hours working on it. Many years ago, a friend of mine wound up sitting next to him from a flight from Paris to San Francisco. My friend foolishly thought he would have someone to speak to during the flight. Instead, after some brief pleasantries, my father spent the next 11 hours of flight working on a paper. This surprised none of us. Not only did he have a passion to explore and discover, he also wanted to share, to teach, and to spread the knowledge of sleep to as many people in as many disciplines as possible. It didn't matter what disciplines you covered, what country you were from. Growing up, I would go on trips or attend dinners with him, and he would be talking to people from Finland, Japan, or Turkey, giving them advice on how to establish sleep clinics. If you were interested in sleep, and sometimes, even if you weren't, he would happily give your guidance on your journey. He wanted the knowledge and teaching of sleep to spread like wildfire. He had the same approach when working with colleagues in the medical profession. You could be a cardiologist, pulmonologist, a surgeon, or a dentist, and if you wanted to collaborate on sleep, he would work with you. It was important to him not to work in silos, but to work together to give the patient the best possible care. Because that was the crew of everything to my father, the patients. The desire to share and spread knowledge has many origins. His French upbringings, his time in Africa, his life as an immigrant. All these factors played a role. The result is that his patients' well-being was always at the forefront of his mind. He genuinely cared about them. He would listen to them and work with them. Patients were his motivation, the reason he wanted to share the knowledge to make sure they got the best treatment. It would seem perfect, stupide, as he would say in French, to forget the reason he and all his colleagues were in sleep medicine was to help people. The fact that so many people remember him today and all over the world, be they patient, colleague, or former student, is because my father consistently put his energy into helping them. Most of all have met, read, or worked with my dad. You probably already know most of this. All I can add is that I think what would be most important to him is that you continue to learn, educate, and help others. My brother jokingly talks about the sleep family when speaking about our father's colleagues and patients. So you guys are all the sleep family. I can think of no better term, and for him, no better legacy. All I can do is to encourage you to keep that family strong and keep it growing. Thank you.
Just want to thank Eric as brave and telling your story and what he meant to you. I think a sleep family is exactly right. He's a father to a lot of us, whether biologic or not. I know when he passed this summer, it's the first time I felt that kind of emotion since I lost my father from early onset Alzheimer's, which was later described as Lewy body Parkinson's in 2002. So that was about 17 years ago. For me and for Justine to be here today, having this conversation 10 years after my diagnosis, my treatment, to help save our child's life, to intervene early on, and to now help spread the knowledge and the education so that she's not the exception but the rule, is really what Dr. Gimeno's legacy is. And when it comes down to it, this guy is, you're talking about a Nobel nominee, Louis Pasteur. He's in that ballpark in every way that you can imagine. We will carry on his legacy the rest of our lives. It's as simple as that. I just want to thank everyone for coming today. I know it's not easy to get into the city, especially in a city like this where everyone's busy and fast and moving and important. I'm happy that we got such beautiful weather. Someone was looking over us. We were not stuck in the fog, freezing to death in here. The fact that we were sitting with open windows and not in a closed hotel room with no air and no way to breathe. This is our vision of what a patient conference should be. It's interactive, it's bidirectional, and it's hopefully got something for everyone, whether it's your first day being diagnosed, or if you've never been diagnosed, or if you're a 20-year veteran. We're trying to provide as much information and as much knowledge and as much education to the community out there, no matter where they're at, whether it's on our website or on our social media channels. You've been seeing us filming this today. It's for the audience that's not here. We've also been doing interviews, and you'll see us continue to show these patient stories and all their different perspectives over the course of the year, so that next September we can have another Awake meeting, maybe in a different location, in a different part of the country, and maybe with a different agenda, because we can't cover it all in one day. But we will keep on going. We will keep on doing the research. We have been doing it, and we like to say there's nothing about us without us. And what that really comes down to is that if the patients are not involved in the conversation, if the end user is not there from the beginning, we don't have the whole story and we're missing it. I could have never helped myself if I didn't get self-advocating and start reading Dr. Dement's book and talking about this French Dr. Gaiman we brought in from France. And it really inspired me to say, okay, I got to go meet this guy. And I could tell you to this day, the hair on the back of my neck stood up when he walked in the room, because it was the first time someone walked into the room and knew they were looking at me and I was not the victim. He explained to me what all my life's issues were and why all these things had happened. And I got to say, I used to live in the North Bay, and I used to drive across that bridge, and some days it was covered in fog. And let me tell you, that's where my brain was at. I was in a fog. I couldn't make sense. I couldn't put two and two together. And once I went to see that man and that clinic and his team of sleep family, it burned away that fog. And that was one of the other reasons why we chose this room, this venue, and this location, because you have a national military cemetery and the PTSD and the suicide rate we heard about earlier. You have the Golden Gate Bridge. You have Robin Williams Tunnel. Literally, we're looking right at it. This sleep touches everyone. It's not that we think that sleep apnea is the center of it all, but if you don't have the sleep component in the formula, you don't have the full story. I want to thank everyone for coming. I want to thank our online audience. I want to thank my wife, who I wouldn't be alive without. She put on this venue. She's getting ready to plan my daughter's wedding eventually. We're not doing it here. But I want to thank all my board members. This is probably the first time more of our board members have been in the room together. I want to thank my staff members who've flown from Minnesota, from DC, from San Diego. We have people from all over the country. I want to thank our patients, panelists, who've come from all walks of life and who've come through this journey through one very key issue, and that's nobody owns the airway. So depending upon which door you walk through is usually the intervention and the pathway you're going to be given. And our job here today is to educate the public at large, to go in informed with as much information as you could possibly know, so you can help make the best decision for your precision health pathway and journey. Till next year, good night, and get a good night's sleep.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you for joining us today.